Now that we know the basics of sending syslog messages to a remote syslog server, let's take a look at the benefits. And like I said, I normally would put this earlier in the lesson, but I wanted to show you some of the configuration and features before I got to this. So the biggies are persistence. The logging buffer on your device is actually pretty cool, and you'll use that quite often. I mean, you'll be on a router and you'll do a show log and take a look at what happened in that router. The problem with that is basically threefold. One, it's limited, the memory, so eventually, it will fill up, even though these are just syslog messages, text, and you can set the buffers pretty damn high. Eventually it will fill up, and then it'll just basically overwrite itself. And this comes into play in production networks when you have a consistent error message, something like CDP duplex mismatches or something like that, where you just get an annoying message, it just keeps going over and over and over and over again, and it fills up the log. And unfortunately, once it fills up the log, it might push back something important that you really do need to look at. So using a syslog server, you're going to avoid this because it's going to store these logs on a remote server with plenty of space. I mean, I don't think you're going to run out of space for the text messages on that server. The second is that whenever a Cisco device reloads or loses power, basically it has to reload, then it's going to clear that buffer. That buffer doesn't maintain state over a reload, so it's going to be wiped out. You can see where this is going to be a problem. If you have an error or some change that caused the router to crap itself, it reloaded on its own, you're going to lose that error message. You're just going to see everything that occurs after it comes back up. So if you've got this logging to a remote server, then there's a good chance that you're going to catch those messages and be able to review them later. And then the third one is that you can issue the clear log command. If you're in privilege level 15, that will clear the log on the local device, and those messages are lost, unless of course you have them going to a remote syslog server. Next up is event correlation across devices. This is where I really see a benefit with the syslog server for troubleshooting. You might have an event that happened on R1 that affected 4 other routers. So rather than going to R2, 3, 4, and 5, checking their logs and then going and eventually checking the logs on R1, you can go on the syslog server and just say, what happened at 3 o'clock on the network? Oh, look, the R1 had this error that brought down on my OSPF neighbors. So troubleshooting becomes easier and also more accurate because you have all the information that you need in a single source. Next up is timestamps. This could be trivial, could not be trivial, depending on how your network's set up. Generally, you want to have like a NTP running in your network and have all your devices have the same time. We know that shit gets misconfigured or something happens where timestamp on that device may not be synchronized with the rest of the network. So you might see an error on R1 and it says it happened on March 1st, 1992 or some goofy thing, because your timestamps aren't set up properly. But on a syslog server, they're generally going to have a timestamp of when they received that message, as well as a timestamp that's in the actual syslog message itself, so that can help out. You'll know that instead of happening in 1992, that actually happened in 2010. That's a benefit that it might be trivial and it might not occur quite often, but it still counts. Searching, sorting, this is one of the big bonuses of having a syslog server. And a lot of times you'll have applications that remotely connect to the syslog server, via a browser or something like that, that will give you the ability to search the logs. So again, you'll have access to logs that go back far longer than you would on the local device, plus you're not stuck with just greps into the log. You'll have more refined search tools, so that's a big benefit. Finally, storage of logs. This is kind of like persistence, but what I'm talking about here is long-term storage. So if you got a syslog, you can set this up to actually save the logs out into, I don't know, a spreadsheet or just a text file or whatever. So then when that log gets, to X amount of entries or, bytes, you can go ahead and take it and save it. Basically, you can back up this information, keep it someplace else, and a lot of times this is not only beneficial but mandated. If you work in something like healthcare or the government or something like that, they may mandate that you keep these logs on file for an indefinite period. So with a syslog server you can do that, whereas with just the local logging, you would not be able to do that. Alright, let's wrap this sucker up and get on to the CLI. A Syslog server is usually a necessity in larger networks. I've never worked at a place that did not have a Syslog server, remote Syslog server for the network devices. I can't think of a good reason not to have one, even if cost was something that you were running into. I mean, throw up a Linux box. I would even argue that a small network benefits greatly from implementing a Syslog server. Basically, even with one device you do, because you have that persistence and the ability to maintain the logs for a long period of time, and you're not limited by the buffer or having them cleared out during a reload. So anyways, I just touched on the benefits on the last slide, persistence, event correlation, all that. And basic Syslog server configuration is, like I say here, ridiculously easy. It's logging host and then the IP address or the host name. This lesson did touch on a number of basic configure options that you'll at least want to be aware of. If you have to configure these, you'll know what they do and how to configure them. So that's going to wrap up this lesson. Thanks for joining me in the Packet Lab. I hope to see you over in the lab section where we go over this on the CLI and actually see this in action.